What's up, kings and queens? It's your boy Dan from Daft Previews, and I'm here once again to give you the most comprehensive NBA player prop preview you are going to see today. We're also celebrating 5,000 subscribers. That's over 3,000 subscribers in the last few months. Onwards and upwards will continue to grow. If it's your first time on this channel, I do these videos every single day. I'll be sharing outlier.bet. I'll be going through all the key players, all the key matchups, talking about their form lines. I tell you what I like and I tell you what I don't. And I do all this to give you all the information that you need to make the best bets possible and put more money in your back pocket. Now, Outline.bet is a partner of mine. I do have a link in the description box for you to get a 7-day free trial. So jump ahead, go ahead and use it. Now, let's go. So we're kicking things off with the Brooklyn Nets versus the New York Knicks. And they got a very early game. I believe it's 1 p.m. in the afternoon over there, 4 a.m. for me, but very early game nonetheless. Looking at the lineups, no major changes in terms of game time decisions. So let's jump into it. What key players do we have today? We'll start with Dennis Schroeder. We'll go through all the Brooklyn Nets, and then we'll jump through the New York Knicks. Now, Schroeder scored 5 points in Milwaukee Bucks, absolutely cost us one of our BAPs, a badass parlay, but he's covered this points line of 12.5 in 7 out of his last 10 games. Does have a difficult matchup here against the New York Knicks, who allow the second fewest points to point guards on the season. Turning to his assist prop, he's covered this in 7 out of his last 10. Somewhat difficult matchup, but Dennis Schroeder at 6.5 at plus money, I could be tempted to play that. Looking at his rebound line, it's 2.5, only 2 out of his last 10. I wouldn't bet the over or the under for Dennis Schroeder's rebounds. I'll be staying right out of that. Jumping into Nick Claxton, his points props at 10.5. Difficult matchup. The Knicks allow the fewest points to centers on the season. Now, he has covered this in 7 out of his last 10. 3 out of his last 6, but his last 3 games against the Knicks, he has gone under. Jumping into his rebound prop. Now, this is one of the leans, one I'm strongly considering, and I'm leaning towards the under here. So his line's at 10.5. There's the under, minus 119. Now, he's gone under 10.5 rebounds in 9 out of his last 10 games. The New York Knicks allow the 6th fewest rebounds to centers on the season. Now, Claxton's gone under in 4 out of his last 6 against the Knicks. The last time he played them, though, he did have 17 rebounds. So I'm going to look into this a little bit further, figure out what was going on in that game and why was that so different. And if I'm happy with it, I'll play it. So as always, check the pinned comment if you're interested in writing my bets. But ultimately, I hope in this preview gives enough information to make your own. I'm going to look at Cam Thomas. His points prop 22.5. Now, up against the Knicks, does have a difficult matchup. He's covered this in 4 out of his last 10, and he's gone under in 6 consecutive games against the Knicks. The one thing I want to call out, though, he's only had one of these games where he played more than 30 minutes, and that was in this game where he scored 20, which is very much close to this line. And if you look at his last 10 games, he's playing close to 34 minutes a night. So I wouldn't write him off based on that form. I'm not loving the point prop, to be honest, but one lean that I do have, and I want to show you this right now, is on Cam Thomas, is to look at his rebounds plus assists. So in terms of the matchup, it is a difficult one. The Knicks don't allow many rebounds at all or assists to shooting guards on this season. But Cam Thomas has hit this in 7 out of his last 10. He's playing a lot more minutes. He's getting 6.4 potential assists, 8.4 rebound chances. And if we look at the head-to-head matchups, yeah, he's gone under in 6 straight. But that one game where he played 32 minutes against New York, he had 2 rebounds, 7 assists. I do feel like to get 7.5 at plus money, you're looking for 1 extra rebound, 1 extra assist from the last time he played 32 minutes. He's playing more minutes. He's getting a lot of potential assists and rebound chances. So I don't mind what I'm seeing. I'm obviously going to look into it a little bit further, but it is a plus money play, and you guys know how aroused I get when it's plus money on the table. Of course, we got Mikal Bridges. I think we've all agreed as a community, we're not looking at Bridges props no more, so he can go fuck himself. Moving into the New York Knicks, we'll start with Jalen Brunson. So his points props at 29.5. The Brooklyn Nets, they have actually done a better job stopping point guards from scoring as of late, but on the season, they haven't been very good. Now, Brunson's covered this line of 29.5 in 4 out of his last 10 games. Against the Brooklyn Nets, he's covered in 3 out of his last 6, scored 30 points in their last matchup in January. Looking at his assist prop, line's at 6.5. He has covered this in 5 out of his last 10 and only 1 of his last 6 against Brooklyn. And if you're interested in his rebound numbers, it's 3.5, 4 of his last 10, 3 out of his last 6 against the Nets. Josh Hart. So he broke a lot of hearts once again in his last game. I personally didn't take anything for Josh Hart. Thank God. He only scored 2 points against Denver. So Points-wise, not looking great for him, but he does have a good matchup here against Brooklyn. They do allow the second most points to small forwards on the season. So he's hit this line in 5 of 10 and only 1 of 4 against the Nets. He only scored 2 points the last time they played. Looking at his assist prop, 4.5. He's covered in 5 of his last 10, 1 of his last 4 against Brooklyn. And rebounding, lines at 10.5, 7 out of his last 10. And in head-to-head matchups, 1 out of his last 4. So he does have a great matchup to get plenty of rebounds, points, and assists. But given the way the lines are set and his recent form, I'm not interested in playing it. Dante DiVincenzo. Let's have a look at his points prop here. 15.5, 5 out of his last 10. 1 out of his last 2 against Brooklyn. Quick look at his 3-point line, 3.5, 4 out of his last 10 games, 1 out of his last 2 against the Nets. The Nets allowed the 11th fewest 3-pointers made to shooting guards. So there's nothing really screaming out to me there. So for this particular game, Nick Claxton and Cam Thomas, they do have my attention. So I'll be diving into that after this. Jumping into the Sacramento Kings versus the Orlando Magic, we've got Gary Harris as the only game time decision from key players in this match. So let's go ahead and cap this up. We'll start with Jalen Suggs. I've got quite a few leans on this game, so this portion of the video might be a little bit longer as I dive a little bit deeper. So looking at Jalen Suggs, his points props at 12.5. He has covered in 6 out of his last 10. He's got a great matchup here against the Sacramento Kings. So I do like what I'm seeing points-wise. He has covered this in 2 of his last 3, scored 24 points in the last matchup against the Kings. So that looks pretty good. Looking at his rebound numbers, lines at 3.5. He's covered this in 5 out of his last 10. He does have a difficult matchup here. I mean, he's covered in 1 of 3 against the Sacramento Kings. And then his assist prop, that line's at 2.5. He's covered in 5 of his last 10. Has had a great success against the Kings. 3 consecutive games going over his assist prop. So given what we've seen here, what I'm actually leaning towards is his points plus assists. I do like his points prop, don't get me wrong. But points assists also has my attention. Lines at 14.5, minus 119. Obviously, he's crushed both his points and his assist prop in his last 2 games against the Kings. And in his last 10, he's been getting pretty busy with it. So as I look through it now, probably the points prop I like the most. It does have the best matchup there. And he has been hitting on quite a regular basis. So there's Jalen Suggs. Who else have we got? Paolo Banchero. Let's have a look at him. So he does have a great matchup to score some points here. His line's at 21.5. He's covered in 5 of his last 10. Scored 43 points the last time he versus Sacramento Kings, covering in 2 out of his last 3 against them. So I don't normally back Banchero scoring props, but when the line's at 21.5 and he's got a matchup like this, it's something that I may consider. So I'm just going to add that to my short list right here. Looking at his assist numbers, 5.5 is the line. He's covered this in 4 of his last 10 games. Has a great matchup, but has gone under in 3 consecutive games against the Kings. And his rebound line at 7.5, 4 out of his last 10 games. Another good matchup, covered in 2 out of his last 3 against Sacramento. Wendell Carter Jr. So I do have a lean on Wendell Carter Jr. It's not at his points, but let me get through this one. Tough matchup here against the bonus. He's covered in 5 of his last 10, 2 out of his last 3 against the Sacramento Kings. His rebound line's at 7.5, and he has covered this in 7 out of his last 10, which I like. In head-to-head matchups, 9, 7, and 7. So he's only covered in 1 out of his last 3, but his last 2 games, he was very, very close. My actual lean for this game, though, I'm looking at his rebounds plus assists. It's at 9.5. The reason being, his assist numbers as of late have picked up. Once upon a time, his assist prop was at 1.5, and it's a plus money. I did play it a few times. If we look at it here, it's still 1.5, but it's minus 120. So I might even just play the assist prop on its own. I've still got to investigate that a little bit further because he's hit this very well against the Sacramento Kings. The matchup is good, and he's been crushing it as of late. So Wendell Carter Jr. assists or his rebounds plus assists, they're the 2 of them really tossing up. But could almost guarantee that we see a Wendell Carter Jr. Prop in my bet selection. The next one's Franz Wagner. Now, Franz, difficult person to bet on, up and down like an absolute yo-yo. 17.5 is his line, 4 out of his last 10, 1 out of his last 3 against the Kings. His assist numbers at 3.5, it's plus money, but he's only hit in 3 of his last 10, 1 out of his last 3 against Sacramento, and his rebound line's at 4.5. He's covered in 5 out of his last 10, and he's gone under in 3 straight games against the Sacramento Kings. We see these types of numbers all the time from Franz. PRA, his line's at 26.5. Covered this in 3 of his last 10. Doesn't have a great matchup anywhere from points. His rebounds and assist matchup is a difficult one too. So I'd definitely be leaning to the under in his PRA here. He's hit it in 2 out of his last 3. He hit the under in 2 of his last 3. But yeah, I'm not feeling it. Obviously, everything tells me he's going to go under, but just don't have the vibe to make that bet. All right, we're jumping into the Sacramento Kings. We'll have a look at Malik Monk first. So Malik Monk's points line's at 16.5, and he's covered this in 8 of his last 10 games. Difficult matchup here against the Magic, who are a very strong defensive unit, but he did score 37 points the last time these teams played, covering in 1 out of his last 3. So I don't mind this for Malik. I'll add that to my list of leans. I've already got a lot of leans on this game, to be honest, but that points drop's not looking too bad. Assist-wise, that line's at 4.5. He's covered in 7 out of his last 10, and he's hit in 3 consecutive games against the Orlando Magic, which is pretty wild. And then his rebound props at 3.5, 6 out of his last 10, but 1 out of his last 3 against Orlando. There's something I might even consider is just his points plus assists. That's hit in 7 of his last 10. He's hit only that in 1 of his last 3, but he has had strong assist numbers in the past. So that's something I don't ultimately mind, but I'll dive into Malik Monk a little bit further. I'll get back to you on whether I make a bet on it. Harrison Barnes. So I do have a lean on Harrison Barnes, but let's get through all these main props and I'll talk you through what I'm thinking. So his points props at 11.5, and he's hit this quite well. 5 out of his last 6 games in head-to-head matchups. 2 out of his last 3 against the Magic. Scored 17 points the last time they played. I honestly don't hate that. Looking at his assist numbers, I know no one's going to bet the 0.5, and his rebound numbers at 2.5. Ain't nobody touching that either. But what I'm actually thinking of betting on is this. Now, it's pretty obvious, as you can see, why. Anyone using outlier is probably going to be on this bet. So it's Harrison Barnes over 3.5 first quarter points. Now, you can see that he's cashed this in 10 consecutive games. 3.5 is great because he only needs 2 buckets. It could be a 3 and a layup or whatever it may be, but he just needs 2 buckets. The matchup's not a difficult one. Probably one of the best matchups that Orlando can deliver. And I don't mind this for Harrison Barnes. Let me know in the comment section if you think this is worth betting on. He's hit on 2 out of his last 3. Scored 6 points in the first quarter the last time these teams played. So we're only needing 2 baskets from Harrison Barnes here. And over his last 10, he's been absolutely cashing. But I don't mind his points prop either. So I'm going to take note to look into that whilst I look into his first quarter prop as well. All right, we're jumping into Domantas Sabonis here. I do have a lean on this one, but it's not a very strong lean, and I'll explain why. Firstly, his points props are 18.5, 5 out of his last 10. He's covered in 2 out of his last 3 against the Magic. Nothing to really bang home about. His assist numbers at 7.5. It's plus money. 6 out of his last 10. Has killed the assists against the Orlando Magic in his last 2 games. He had 12 assists in that last game against them. But that last game can really throw something out. The score was 135 to 138. That is a high scoring game. I doubt we see anything that close in this one. The total points line is projected to be 216. So the thought of assists, that doesn't really drive me wild for this game. But what I could be interested in playing here is his rebound prop. So the line's at 13.5. He's covered this in 9 out of his last 10. Orlando is a difficult matchup. They allow the 3rd fewest rebounds to centers on the season, which is why we see Domantas Sabonis line a little bit lower. But at the same time, we're projecting only 216 points here, and a lot of that is to do with pace. The Magic play with the 5th slowest pace in the league, but they also don't shoot at a great field goal percentage. So there's going to be a lot of rebound opportunities in this game. They're a good defensive team, and I'm thinking Domantas Sabonis takes advantage of the matchup. He did have 23 rebounds in the last game that they played, so the pace was very high in that one. Hopefully we see a higher pace in this, but slow or not, I think Sabonis can get these boards for sure. So that's definitely one of the leans for me. Who else have we got? De'Aaron Fox. So his points line's at 24.5. Tough matchup for him. 4 of his last 10. Only covered in 1 out of his last 3. So that high scoring game in their last one, he only scored 15 points. When we look at assists, the line's at 5.5. He's covered in 5 of his last 10 games. He's got a tough matchup here, but he's covered in 2 of his last 3 against the Magic. His rebound props at 4.5, 6 out of his last 10, and 1 of 3 against the Orlando Magic. So not loving what I'm seeing from Fox here, but check this out. I got a long list of leans. I'll be looking further into Harrison Barnes, Domantas Sabonis, Malik Monk, Paolo Banchero, and Wendell Carter Jr., and Jalen Suggs. So might even put together a juicy same-game parlay in this one just because there's so many great options for me to choose from. I might bap up just an SGP, so stay tuned for that. We're now looking into the Charlotte Hornets versus the Atlanta Hawks. Now, the injury list for both teams is crazy. So there's going to be a lot of players playing more minutes than they normally would. So it's going to be difficult to get a good read on which players you kind of should bet on, because a lot of these lines are going to appear a lot higher than they should be based on their averages. Let's talk about it. So we'll go through the Atlanta Hawks first. Let's start with Clint Capella. So he's got a great matchup here. His line's at 12.5, 6 out of his last 10 games, and he's hit on 3 out of his last 4 against the Charlotte Hornets. You can see he's covered 10 plus points in 9 out of his last 10 games. Clint Capella double-double, that could be a good option as well. Just having a look at the odds of that before I start saying it is. So yeah, it's minus 120 for him to get a double-double. Looking at his rebound numbers, line's at 11.5. He's hit this in 4 out of his last 10. So he's hit 10 plus rebounds in 7 of his last 10 games. He hit points in 9 of his last 10. But in head-to-head matchups, he's only gotten 10 plus rebounds 2 out of his last 4. So you might want to play points plus rebounds for Clint Capella. So he's hit in 5 out of his last 10, 3 of his last 4 against the Charlotte Hornets. In this game where he went under, slightly under his points, slightly under his rebounds, but he has been cashing quite well. This last game was in October, so the start of this season, 15 points and 13 rebounds against the Charlotte Hornets. Looking at the numbers, it looks great, but I'm just not getting the right for it. Let's have a look at DeAndre Hunter. So his points line's at 19.5, 4 of his last 10, 3 out of his last 6 against Charlotte. Should get more opportunities given how depleted the Hawks are, but also see a line at 19.5. It's a lot higher than it normally should be. Rebound-wise, his line's at 4.5. He's only covered this in 1 out of his last 10 games, despite the extra opportunities, and 2 of his last 6 against the Hornets. DeJounte Murray, his points prop here is at 25.5. He's covered this in 4 of his last 10, 1 out of his last 5 against the Charlotte Hornets. His assist line, 9.5. He's covered this in 5 of his last 10, 3 consecutive games now. You can get this for plus money, but he's gone under and very far under in 5 consecutive games against the Hornets. But obviously, no Trae Young. That kind of throws this out a little bit. You might want to look at games without Trae Young to see how many times he's played against the Charlotte Hornets. And we can see, without Trae Young, he hasn't played a game against them, right? So all of these numbers that you see are with Trae Young in the lineup, where he obviously averages a lot less assists. So difficult to get a read on this game. Rebound-wise, his line's at 5.5. He does have a good matchup in this one. 5 out of his last 10, 2 out of his last 5 against the Charlotte Hornets. But yeah, it's a very difficult game to cap this one. If you're looking at player props, you've really got to dive into them all. And I may not have enough time to do all that. But I want to share with you one lean that I do have, and it's for this guy, Vit Krejci. I've got no idea whether I'm saying that right. But he's recently seen a big uplift in his minutes. He's in the starting lineup, and that's because of all the injuries. The play that I'm considering taking here is just his under in his PRA, under 14.5. So he has gone under 14.5 PRA in every single game that he's played this year, right? Which is not many. 9 games played this season. He's gone under in every single one of them. I would project him to play about 30 to 35 minutes. Played 37 minutes against the Phoenix Suns. And in that game, 9 points, 1 rebound, 4 assists. So just falling short of this line, 14.5. Now, against the Charlotte Hornets, they actually defend shooting guards quite well. They allow the 7th fewest points allowed. They do allow some rebounds. They do allow some assists. But Krejci, I don't believe he's got a big bag of assists and rebounds in his back pocket. The Charlotte Hornets also play at a very slow pace. So the total for this game is only 214. Now, both of these teams you think can't play defense, but the total line set is only 214, which means it might be difficult for someone like this to rack up some stats. So I don't know if I'm willing to trust the data on this one. Maybe I'm completely wrong, but it's one thing I'm considering, but I'll check it out a bit further later on. Jumping into the Charlotte Hornets, Vasily Micic. So you guys know that I've bet on this guy many times before. He does have a great matchup to score points here against Atlanta, but he's covered this in 5 out of his last 10 games. The last time he played the Hawks, he scored 13 points. He played only 20 minutes, shot 4 for 9. In his 10 games, he's seeing at least 31 minutes a night. So I'd probably lean to the over in this one. But Micic could find himself on the old bat play, I think. But let me take note of his name just so I don't forget. Looking at his assist number, that's at 5.5. He's covered this in 5 out of his last 10. He's got a great matchup, had 5 assists against the Hawks last time.
But Michik, he's either scoring or he's getting assists. I don't find him doing both. And this is a game where he does have a good matchup for both. But I don't know. I'm willing to take the risk on his points more than his assists, to be honest. Miles Bridges, his points props 20.5, 5 out of his last 10 games. Got a good matchup here against Atlanta, but he only scored 17 points the last time they played, and the Hornets won by 23 points. Looking at his rebound numbers, 8.5, it's plus money, 6 out of his last 10, and he had 5 boards against the Hawks last time. Brandon Miller, his points prop 19.5. 5 out of his last 10 games. This is a road game. He scored 26 points the last time against Atlanta, so that's positive. Assist number at 2.5. 5 of his last 10, 1 of his last 2 against the Hawks. And his rebound line here, 4.5. He's covered this in 7 out of his last 10 games. And head-to-head matchups, 1 of his last 2 against Atlanta. So I'm not really feeling that. We got Trey Mann, but I'm not really feeling that either. But let's talk through it. His line's at 12.5. He's only covered in 3 of his last 10, but he did score 21 points the last time he played Atlanta. But I think that might be an outlier. He does have a good matchup, like most players in this game. But again, that line projection is only at 214, so it's very low. It's one of the lowest on the night, to be honest, except for, what is it, the Brooklyn versus New York? That's at 204. What's going on? Is this the 90s again? His assist number, 4 of his last 10 in head-to-head matchups. He's had 6. And rebound line, 4 of his last 10. And in head-to-head matchups, he had 8. So he had a great game the last time he played Atlanta, but he hasn't been delivering on a consistent basis. So, yeah, I'd be a little bit hesitant to take him. Let's jump into the next game. It's the Phoenix Suns versus San Antonio Spurs. So looking at this game, we see Yusuf Nurkic is a game-time decision in this one. He's likely to play, but he is a game-time decision at this point. Let's have a look at these Phoenix Suns first. We'll start with Grayson Allen. We'll just look at his points prop here. Covered in 6 out of his last 10 games, which is great. And he's covered in his last 2 games against the Spurs, scoring 19 and 16 points in the last 2 games against them. Both of those games happen to be this season, but the Suns now on the road in this one. I don't hate that play, to be honest, but the Phoenix Suns can be quite difficult. You've already got the big 3, KD, Booker, Bill. Grayson Allen can score some points, and Nurkic sometimes has these games where they just don't stop beating him in the post, which makes it a bit difficult. We've got Bradley Beal here, 16.5 points. He's had 2 shockers, gone well under his line. That line does drop. He does have a good matchup here against the Spurs, but he's covered in 6 out of his last 10. Given his recent struggles from the field and his low shot attempts, 6 and 7 shot attempts, I'm not overly keen on taking that. But what I do like is this. Check out his assist numbers. His line's at 5.5 now. Best matchup in basketball. The Spurs are the most assists to shooting guards on the season. Now, Bradley Beal's covered this in 8 of his last 10 games. Not only cover in his last 5, he's absolutely crushed it. We have the assist prop most recently, and it's been delivering for us. His potential assists, you can see it here, are just going up and up and up. So he's clearly taking on the playmaking role in that team. He's not taking many shots. It's not like he's taking a lot of shots and he's missing a lot. He's not taking a lot of shots. He's passing the ball to other people, and that's where we see these assists come in. So it's one of the players that is on my short list. Looking at his rebounds, 4.5, 4 of his last 10. We don't like that. It's up and down. Who the fuck knows what's going to happen here with Bradley Beal? So let's get into the next one. Look at that Kevin Durant, the Slim Reaper. His points props only at 23.5. He does have a difficult matchup here, and he's gone under in 5 consecutive games. God damn. Head-to-head matchups, though, he's covered in 2 out of his last 3 against the Spurs. Both times he played them this season, he did go over that line, so I'd be a little bit hesitant to take the under, but that's where I'm leaning. His assist line, 3.5. 6 out of his last 10 games, 1 of his last 3 against the Spurs. And his rebound props at 6.5. I took it against the Atlanta Hawks. He gave me 4. Fuck you, Kevin Durant. And we look at his head-to-head matchups. He's gone under in 3 consecutive games against the Spurs. So, yeah, not feeling anything for KD, to be honest. Let's have a look at D-Book. His points prop, 25.5. Great matchup here. He's covered in 3 out of his last 10 games, though. Last 2 games against the Spurs, very similar to KD. He's gone over 27 and 31 points. Looking at his assist numbers, 5.5's the line. He's covered in 6 of his last 10, 2 out of his last 3 against the San Antonio Spurs. Absolutely lit them up for 13 assists when they played back in November. His rebound props at 4.5, 6 of his last 10, 2 of his last 3 against the Spurs. So he has filled it up, but I feel like Bradley Beal's the person who's going to get not the majority, but I feel more confident in taking Bradley Beal's assist prop. I do like recent form over historical form, but that's just me. And I could be completely wrong. And looking at my betting record, I'm wrong almost half the time. So having a look at these Spurs, let's get it on with Victor Wembanyama. He's got a tough matchup here against Yusuf Nurkic. 22.5 is his line. He's covered in 5 of his last 10. Absolutely killed the Memphis Grizzlies today. So he's on a back-to-back. Head-to-head matchups. He scored 38 points the last time he versed the Phoenix Suns. 18 points prior to that. His assist line's at 4.5. He's covered in 6 of his last 10. He's gone under in both games against the Suns. And his rebound matchup, 11.5, 6 out of his last 10 games, but he did go under this in his last 2 games against Phoenix. Devin Vassell, his line's at 21.5 in this game. Matchup, a little bit difficult, but 5 of his last 10 he's covered, but he's gone under in 3 consecutive games now against the Phoenix Suns. If you like his assists, it's at 4.5, 5 of his last 10, 1 of his last 3 against Phoenix, and his rebound props at 4.5. He's covered in 5 of his last 10 games and 2 out of his last 3 against the Phoenix Suns. So I'm not loving anything I'm seeing so far. Jeremy Sohan, his points prop 13.5. Great matchup here against KD, believe it or not. He's covered in 4 of his last 10 games, 2 out of his last 3 against Phoenix. His assist line's at 2.5. He's been covering it quite well. 4 straight, 7 of his last 10, and he's covered his assist prop in 3 consecutive games against the Phoenix Suns. His rebounds, 7.5. He's covered in 7 of his last 10, which is pretty good. Against the Suns, he's only covered in 1 out of his last 3. Outside of that, there's no one else in the Spurs I'm really keen on, so let's jump into the next game. It's a Toronto Raptors versus the Washington Wizards. Teams that are tanking right now. This is a real difficult one to bet on because a lot of these guys who are playing don't usually play these types of minutes. We've also got Jordan Poole and Gary Trent Jr. as game time decisions in this one. So let's do our absolute best, shall we? We'll start with Kyle Kuzma. His points line, 24.5. He's covered in 5 out of his last 10 games, 2 out of his last 4 against the Raptors. His assist prop is at 5.5. He's only covered in 2 out of his last 10 and 1 out of his last 4 against the Raptors. He did have 7 assists the last time these teams played, and the Raptors won that game by 30 points. I'm personally leaning to the under in this one, and I've taken note to lean on the under for Kyle Kuzma, but I'm really waiting for lineups to be confirmed because if Jordan Poole is out, somebody's got to create their offense, and most likely it's going to be Kyle Kuzma. His rebound prop, that's at 7.5. He's covered this in 3 of his last 10, and he's gone under in 4 consecutive games against the Raptors. So I'm also leaning on the under for his rebounds prop. We've got Marvin Bagley in as well, who is a strong rebounder. So that might impact Kuzma's ability to get more boards. So I'm leaning on the under on both his assists and his rebounds, but I've got to dive into that a bit further before I make my final picks. Denny Advia, let's have a look at him. Points lines at 17.5. He's covered in 2 out of his last 10 games. Does is a great matchup, but he's gone under in 5 consecutive games against the Raps. His assist line's at 3.5. He's covered in 4 of his last 10. In head-to-head matchups, he's covered in 2 out of his last 5. And his rebound line's at 8.5. He's covered in 6 of his last 10, 2 of his last 5 against the Raptors. So, yeah, Denny can produce, just not at the rate that I would like to see. Now, I'm not going to go through all the other players, and this is why. If we just have a look at the right side of this screen, this is basically telling me that these players have hit in 2 out of their last 10 games. Some of them, 1 of their last 10 games. And the reason being is a lot of these points props, their assist props, their rebound props, a lot of them are up a lot higher than their hit rates because they're playing a lot of minutes than they ever had before. So I don't believe it's worth looking at this particular data set to go through these types of players. You don't know what the fuck they're going to do. So I'll leave that up to you to do your own type of research. Let's get into the next one. It's the Boston Celtics versus the Chicago Bulls. Now, we only have lineups on the Chicago Bulls for this game because, once again, the Boston Celtics are fucking with us. They're clear leaders in the East, doing a bit of load management, I assume. But we've got Drew Holiday and Jason Tatum, Al Horford, all game time decisions in this game. We also have Kobe White, Alex Caruso's game time decisions as well. So we'll go through some of the Bulls players, see if we can find something juicy. We'll start with DeMar DeRozan. His points prop, 22.5. He's covered in 6 out of his last 10 games. In head-to-head matchups, he's gone under in 3 consecutive games now against the Boston Celtics, 3 out of his last 6. His assist line's at 4.5. He's covered in 4 of his last 10. 4 out of his last 6 against Boston. But I think DeRozan's really cooled off. He was someone great to bet on probably about 2 weeks ago. Starting to cool off. His rebound line at 4.5, 6 out of his last 10, and only 2 of his last 6 against the Celtics. So I'm not loving anything there. Vucevic, I was considering his. His line's at 18.5. He's covered in 6 of his last 10. 3 out of his last 6 against the Boston Celtics. His assist props at 2.5. 4 of his last 10. 3 of his last 6 against Boston. And his rebound props at 10.5. He's covered in 5 out of his last 6 against Boston, which is great. I do like that. And in his last 10, he's covered in 7 out of his last 10. The challenge I'm finding here is that the Boston Celtics allow the fewest rebounds to centers on the season. It does make it difficult when Kristaps Porzingis is bloody 30 feet from the basket and you've got to defend him out there. But it's something that I'm considering. I don't love it. I don't have a strong feeling in my gut about it, but I think it's worth looking into. Jumping into Kobe White, his points prop 17.5. He does have a good matchup here against Boston, but he's covered in 5 of his last 10. He did score 19 and 20 points in his 2 games against them this season, which is good to see. And we know that the Celtics don't defend point guards very well. Looking at his assist prop, it's at 3.5, 2 of 5 against Boston, 6 out of his last 10, but he's gone under in 3 straight. And his rebound props at 4.5, 5 out of his last 10. Does have a good matchup here, but he's gone under in 5 consecutive games against the Boston Celtics. Have a look at Ayo Dosunmu. His points prop 14.5. He's covered this in 4 of his last 5. His last 3 games, he's been an absolute beast. 5 of his last 10 he's covered, but he's hit only 1 of his last 6 against the Celtics. His assist props at 4.5, 6 out of his last 10. And 1 out of his last 6 against Boston, but he did have 8 assists the last time they played. That was about a month ago. And his rebound props at 3.5, 3 of his last 10, and 2 of his last 6 against Boston. I honestly don't mind his points and assists in this game. He's been hitting it quite well as of late. And against Boston, he did hit it in their last matchup, scoring 14 points and 8 assists. The matchup is a difficult one, but who he is this season is a very different player to who he was in the past. And his recent form is great. So definitely wouldn't rule that out. But now we're jumping into the last game, and it's the Utah Jazz versus the Houston Rockets. Far out. Started seeing things for a moment. In this game, we've got John Collins. He's a game time decision, as well as Yurtseven. Outside of that, all the Rockets players, good. They're ready to bang. They're ready to go. In this game, the Rockets are 11-point favorites to win. So I imagine we're going to see the Rockets line slightly higher than we're used to seeing. And the reason why I believe that to be is because a lot of what I'm seeing on this graph is red and yellow. What that tells me is these lines must be higher, or a lot of people who, don't normally start are probably starting in this game. So we'll start with the Utah Jazz and hopefully finish with a banger. We'll go with John Collins first. His points line at 16.5. He's covered this in 6 out of his last 10. Only scored 7 points the last time he played the Houston Rockets. His rebound props at 9.5. He's covered in 5 of his last 10. Only had 6 boards against the Rockets last time. Colin Sexton, his line's at 23.5. There's not many props available for Colin Sexton at the moment. It's probably because he's not starting in this game, according to RotoWire. But he's covered in 4 out of his last 10. But 23.5 seems very high. We've got Keontae George. So his line's at 19.5. He's covered in 4 of his last 10 games. He's gone under in 4 straight, though. Only scored 3 points against the Rockets last time. His assist props at 5.5. 4 of his last 10. Only had 2 assists last time against them. So if you're looking at his points plus assists, it's at 24.5. He's gone under in 4 straight. 5 of his last 10. He's got a tough matchup for both against these Rockets. Did struggle last time, but he only played 10 minutes. So definitely I'd lean to the under, given the matchup and his very recent form. But without Clarkson in the lineup, he might get more opportunities, but we do see the return of Chris Dunn in this one. Jumping into the Houston Rockets, let's go Fred VanVleet firstly. So his points line at 16.5. He's covered in 6 of his last 10. He's gone under in 3 straight. He did score 18 against Houston last time. Now, his assist prop has been money as of late. We have been betting on it from when it was 7.5 up until it was 8.5. Now it's at 9.5. It is plus money. He does have a great matchup here. The Jazz allow the most the most assists to point guards on the season. He's hit this in 6 of his last 10. Did only have 7 assists in that last game against the against the Utah Jazz. Yeah, I feel like this line's just a little bit too high for me to take. I feel like it's too obvious, right? His form as of late is great. He does have a great matchup. I'm not saying it's a trap, but it's one of these ones that I feel like is too obvious for me to take the bet. because a lot of those times it screws me. His rebound prop 3.5, 6 of his last 10. Did have 5 boards against the Rockets last time though, so yeah, I don't hate the 3.5. He has finished on 3 quite a few times, but I don't feel like such a bad play. And Thompson. So his points props at 14.5. He's covered this in 4 consecutive games now. We're going to check out his numbers without Şengün in the lineup. So Şengün's missed 6 games this season. Since his injury, Amin Thompson has covered this in 4 out of the last 5 games. So Şengün's been missing for a 5-game stretch now. Thompson been playing very well at the moment. Looking at the matchup against Utah, it is a good one. So a good opportunity for him to get some points. A lot of his points are layups and in transition. So I don't hate this for him. The line has moved though. It was 12.5 in his last game against the Chicago Bulls. If we look at the pace of both teams, the Jazz play at the 10th fastest pace. The Rockets 14th fastest pace on the season, but I think since Şengün's been out, they're probably paying, I think they're in the fourth or 5th fastest pace in the league. So yeah, I don't mind that for Thompson. Looking at his rebound numbers, 8.5 the line. He does have a tough matchup here. Has been very close to it though, so I won't completely rule it out. And his assist line's at 2.5, 4 of his last 10, somewhat inconsistent there. So I do like his points prop the best, but I'll have to dive into that a bit further. Jabari Smith Jr. So we had a plus 1,400 same game parlay in that last game against the Bulls. We needed Jabari Smith for 15 points. He was the only leg that failed. He only scored 5. He shot terribly. He was 2 for 10 in that game. So a little bit of animosity coming from me. But the matchup's not bad here against Utah. He's covered in 4 of his last 10. Scored 24 points the last time that they played against him. 2 of his last 4. And then his rebounds prop at 8.5, 4 of his last 10. 3 out of his last 4 against the Jazz, though. But the matchup is supposedly a difficult one. So I'm not feeling any Jabari Smith Jr. bets. And lastly, let's close off with Jalen Green, who's been killing it as of late. Now, his points line has soared up to 27.5 to the point where he's covered this in only 3 of his last 10. Şengün's obviously been out for, 5 to 6 games. And you can see Jalen Green, definite uplift in his performance since then. So I'm not game enough to take the 27.5. I feel like that line is just about right. The Jazz do an okay job defending shooting guards, so I'm a little bit hesitant. He has covered in 1 of his last 4 games against Utah. What I am considering, though, is this. Over 3.5 3-pointers for Jalen Green. So it's plus money, and you know how I like that. He's got a good matchup. The Jazz allow the 7th most 3-pointers made to shooting guards on the season, and he's covered this in 4 consecutive games. You dive a little bit deeper into those 4 games, he's obviously getting the minutes, but he's averaging, look at the 3-point attempts in those last 4. 9, 9, 13, and 12 3-point attempts from Jalen Green. So looking for him to shoot 30 to 40% in order to hit. He's shooting 39% over his last 10 games. I don't mind this for plus money. Let me know what you guys think, but I am going to dive into that a little bit further before I make my final pick. Do a little bit of line shopping as well. Now, I know we've gone through all the games, but I'm not ready to wrap up the video just yet. Just want to acknowledge a few things. Obviously, I read through a lot of the comments, and the comments have been great. You guys have been hashtag bapping it every day, so I will have another bat play, don't you worry. I did mention in my last video the thought of having a watch party, and you guys, based off the comments, are really keen for that. So, as you know, with a watch party, it's almost impossible, really, to stream an NBA game unless you're streaming from someone who's got the rights to stream them. I'm currently in the works of trying to organize something so I'd be able to do that. So if you don't have League Pass, I think there's a small portion of people I can give League Pass to for that particular day in order to watch the games with me. So let me know down below. If you just put a lot of comments around watch party, I'll be more likely to make that shit happen for you. But definitely considering a watch party. Our next subscriber goal. So we hit the 5K. I was hoping to hit 5K by the end of March. We've hit that with a week to spare. So I think for us to get 6,000, I think a great milestone would be the middle of April. So let's aim for the 15th of April. I'd like to see this to 6,000 subs. 55% of the people who watch this aren't subscribed. So I encourage you, if you haven't already subscribed, turn on that notification bell so you don't miss these. My pinned comment and my bets, that's usually up within an hour after I post the video. Oftentimes, I beat the closing line. So if you aren't subscribed, you don't have your notifications turned on, you might see the video a lot later. Therefore, the bets that I take, those lines will move and you lose a lot of value. So if you turn those noties on, you'll find out about my bets as soon as possible. And lastly, if you want to say thanks to me and all the things that I do every single day, there's many ways. Like the video, subscribe if you haven't, drop a comment to help with the algorithm, use the links in the video description. Obviously, with only 5,000 subs, I don't get paid much at all from YouTube, to be honest. But I do get a bit of a kickback if you do use any of those links in the video description. If you're looking for a new sportsbook and you are in the US, I've got a link to Bet US. I've got a deposit match for your first 3 deposits. I think it's 125%. So great opportunity. Take advantage of those. But look, that's all I got for you, lads. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.
Sub to the channel cause your boy's getting busy. Coming to your line from the west side of Sydney. We've got the free picks and the juice on the daily. It's all free, you don't even have to pay me.